Breguet has it all, right? Quality, history, celebrity, everything. And yet they almost have nothing at all. Breguet manufactures watches that could lap Rolex's watches every day of the week. And they have since 1775, just a year before our terrific Declaration of Independence, I might add. And yet they are hardly palatable and really not desired at all on the market. So today we're going to be talking about what makes Breguet so great. We're going to talk about the celebrities they have worn them, from Marie Antoinette to our friend Napoleon. And we're going to talk about some of the most significant and interesting models of the 20th century. And then we're going to ask ourselves, why is it that such a titan could fare so poorly when an average run-of-the-mill kind of watch manufacturer like Rolex could do so well? What is it? What is the difference? Because clearly, quality of horology does not dictate success in horology. By the way, I am wearing a Rolex Datejust with a beautiful engine-turned bezel. This watch is for sale in the Theo and Harris watch shop, so go take a look at the shop and explore all of our vintage watches. What do you have on the wrist today, Sam?
I am rocking a Vaer.
Sam's got his Vaer. Oh, look at you. You're all blurry. Look at you. You got a beautiful Vaer on. That watch looks great on your wrist. That is the model D5 in the Rincon colorway. Beautiful watch. They're making a couple colorways. I absolutely love it. So cheers to our friends over at Vaer. But moving into today's episode, I thought up this whole conversation when I stumbled upon this photo. This is a Breguet from 1971 that was commissioned by a royal family. They called it a cabriolet, and it was referenced 2002. And there's this really cool golf motif on the front. And it reminded me just how great Breguet wristwatches are. Now, so few Breguet wristwatches exist from the 20th century because Breguet wristwatches for the majority of the 20th century were not only few and far between, but entirely custom. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But it sent me down the rabbit hole, down the spiral of the history of the brand, dating back to the 18th century. So again, founded in 1775. Just a couple of years later, in 1783, they made the pocket watch for Marie Antoinette, which was the most complicated piece of horology in the world at the time. This piece is an absolute wonder. Even if you're not a big complication fan, I think that the thought that comes to mind when you look at this is, how? How did someone then think this up, right? Think of the brilliance architecting this piece. Not only, I mean, the architecture alone, but then you think about it was functional. It's truly amazing that they were capable of this. And you look at them, without knowing anything about the watch industry, you'd look at them and say, oh, wow, they must really be the titan today then, huh? If they were that brilliant then, imagine where they are today. And where they are today is not much of a place at all. Fast forward another couple of years to April of 1798. Just a month before setting out on his Egyptian campaign, General Napoleon Bonaparte bought 3 Breguet pieces, which were, in their own words, particularly representative of Breguet's output. A repeating watch, a traveling calendar with a repeating clock, and finally a perpetual repeating watch. It's amazing that these orders were being commissioned all the way back then. Think about, the living conditions in one's home back then, even for the wealthy, and yet in your pocket is a mechanical wonderwork. It's kind of funny, right? I mean, they couldn't think up AC, right? Of course, they didn't have electricity, but the point is, it's, I don't know. I guess it's just amazing to think about the technology that did exist and the technology that, seems so much more complex, right? Technology that we don't take for granted at all. We look at with awe till today, and yet other much more simple things, at least in our minds, much more average things, weren't available and made people's lives far more miserable than our lives today. And at the time, Napoleon, and his cohorts were not only passionate about Breguet because they were functional and they were great, but Breguets were the status symbol, right? Again, it's Marie Antoinette's watch. Breguet was a status symbol. When's the last time that, Breguet was really a large status symbol? Right? I mean, if you're really, really into watches, sure, that a Breguet is a good watch and it's, and it's cool and it's expensive and it's fine. But, Breguet is certainly not a status symbol today. I mean, even in watch circles, it's not that large of a status symbol, right? Because everyone knows that due to their, lack of popularity, they're purchased at a discount, and discounts aren't really generally associated with status symbols, right? So it's amazing to see the fall from grace. But that fall from grace is not a product of a diminishing, quality of output. Not at all. If we fast forward through the 19th century and even into the 20th century, we see that this tradition of fine watchmaking remained. Even though we would see the company Breguet trade hands quite a few times, we would see the quality of product remain. Breguet's famous wristwatch called the Empire was a watch that was not only manufactured in an extremely limited production, but exclusively by commission. And every commission was different. Every different patron, for lack of a better word, would put their own spin on it, or their own tapisserie, their own, patterns, their own everything. It's amazing to think that a company's norm was essentially piece unique, done, made to order. Right? A company of that stature. It's amazing. Today, the idea of, made to order it's becoming a little bit more popular now, but this is not normal. It's not a normal thing that we know in the watch world. We see it in other spaces like clothing, of course, because all of our bodies are different. But because basically anyone can wear any watch, there's no personalization to be done apart from maybe an engraving that you may have done, fine, sure. But the idea of actually being treated like a patron that has a say in an element of the design is amazing. Right? I mean, sure, you got it with Cartier now, but it's just colors. It's just like, can you make it in blue? Which is nothing wrong with that. But I think that we all make much ado about nothing when it comes to the Cartier, made to order program. I think that we, give it far too much credit than it deserves. Not that it's a bad thing, God knows. But think about the level of dedication, the level of detail, the level of time that was committed to each special order, right? That they were actually, hand patterning, hand engraving, creating unique patterns specific to you and your taste. That is just so cool, all within the canvas of their case design. And these vintage Breguets are extremely collectible, right? The collector market agrees that the brand is great. They just don't want anything to do with the modern brand, right? These vintage empires have gone up and up and up. And the world of watch investment is an entirely new space. It's nothing compared to the art investment world, which is a revered asset class today. The statistics have been updated recently, and blue chip whole contemporary art has now outpaced the S&P 500 for the last 27 years by an impressive 136%. And it used to be a totally inaccessible market. You had to be sitting on $100 million to be a player in the art world, but those days are over. The art investment world has been democratized by our friends over at Masterworks. Securitization has opened up a pathway for the average investor to invest in art directly from your smartphone. Masterworks gives you the opportunity to invest in shares of multi-million-dollar paintings from some of the world's most famous and revered artists like Picasso and Banksy. They have completely democratized this well-kept secret of the wealthy. Masterworks has sold over $55 million worth of art, with the net proceeds being paid out to over 62,000 investors. And those investors weren't experts because they didn't have to be, right? Masterworks gave them the guidance and gave them the ability through their share system to ride that wave, right? To invest in the art world. Offerings have sold out in minutes, but because we sent you, you can skip the wait list and invest in art today by going to masterworks.art/Theo Harris. That's masterworks.art/Theo Harris. Thank you to Masterworks, and back into Breguet. So fast forward, what happened, right? What happened to Breguet? They inevitably were bought by Swatch in 1999. During Swatch's massive, ramp up. And since, I think, they've been neglected. Breguet is treated, in my view, as an important piece of watch history that does make money. I imagine it's a profitable company. I'm certain it's a profitable company. But it is not considered an opportunity. It is not considered an opportunity for the Swatch Group to grow and to really, make more money, right? I think that Breguet is what it is. And I do not believe that Swatch is treating it like they want it to be anything larger or more important or more significant or more poetic. I don't think that they are investing at all in their marketing. I don't think they're really investing, into listening to the market and giving it what it wants either. What would I suggest for Breguet as a fan? And I own a Breguet. I love my Breguet tradition. I don't wear it very often, but I love it. And I would suggest, going the route of many of these independents, going back to really personalized service, right? I would not be selling my watches necessarily in authorized dealers with 1,000 other brands. I would say this is the gem of the Swatch Group. And if there is a brand that should be the gem of the Swatch Group, it is certainly Breguet. No one even comes close. Blancpain? No, not even close. Omega? Not even close. Omega is the powerhouse, sure, but not the crown jewel. Breguet is the crown jewel, and they get basically no credit for it. They do not get the leadership that they deserve. And frankly, I think with the proper leadership, they could flourish not only as a brand, as a brand in popularity and profit, but I think as a symbol of the Swatch Group's achievement. I think that Breguet has all of the raw material, right? All of the history, all of the design, all the technology, all of the, not often talked about, but widely recognized, if put a gun to your head, credit for being a father of watchmaking, right? I mean, a Breguet, meaning a member of the Breguet family, has not been involved in the company since the early 19th century. But the DNA remains so clear. It's amazing. It's amazing to see how closely related modern Breguets are to the classic designs. It is in many ways just some of the height of watchmaking. And I think that mismanagement has led it, down some wrong paths that have led to severe depreciation, which I think is a shame. I picked up my Breguet tradition for like $12,500. That should never happen. They're worth like 17 or 18 or 19 now, depending on condition and service and all that stuff. I do think that they'll creep up into the 20s, which is great, but I don't think that does any good for Breguet, right? That's good for, owners that bought them low. But Breguet doesn't profit or benefit in any way from some of their vintage models increasing in value. That's not really a win for the brand. I mean, a little bit, sure, but it's not going to be a win that's going to change the brand, right? But how could the brand change their perception, their function, how often they're talked about? I'd love to see a Breguet, Swatch collab, and I think that it'll probably end up happening, and it could be fun. But that would be, I think if it came now, it would be bad for the brand. I don't think that Breguet has enough chips for them to be playing around. I think that they have a lot of work to do in being treated like a very serious watch manufacturer before they can afford to kind of putz around with plastic. And that being said, I'm a huge fan, obviously. Anyone that's really, really into watches can at least recognize the brilliance of the brand. So I do hope things change. And it really just makes it so clear, right? Breguet is in many ways the antithesis of Rolex. It's the exact opposite. Far deeper heritage and history, far wider set of complications. Rolex's most complicated watches were in the 1950s, I believe, or late 1940s, and they were triple calendars, moon phases. Nothing compared to Breguet. Breguet did 50 times that in 1783. I mean, it's amazing. But the one thing Breguet doesn't understand is marketing, is mass marketing. And they didn't have to understand it in the 20th century. They didn't have to understand it when they were making the Empire because they were commission only, right? It was a smaller company. It was never, in many ways, it was never supposed to be a major global company with product in all these different places in the world. It's not that. It's not how the product is built, right? The product should be more of a pilgrimage, right? I mean, that's what Breguet should be. That's the right word. Breguet should be a pilgrimage. To buy a Breguet, should be a great honor that you would actually get on a plane for, the same way that, today buying a Journe is that. Right, buying a truly great Journe is worth not just one, but many plane tickets for people. And I think that F.P. Journe himself would agree that in many ways he's just sitting in the seat that ought to be reserved for Breguet, right? In many ways, without being too dramatic. But I do think that is, largely true. And it's a shame that they're not sitting in that seat. And who knows if they ever will? I don't know. That's all about leadership at Swatch Group. So I don't know. And if there's any judging by how many moon swatches they've released, I think that they're just going to continue to chase dollars, which is what they do, And I'm not the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, so I'm not saying my advice is correct in how to further your empire. Certainly not. But the advice that I'm giving about how to restore Breguet to be something truly treasured and special is certain. Right? That's correct, right? Because the way it's being managed now, I think the Breguet will continue to dwindle forever. And that's it. I don't think the Breguet will ever, at this rate, be respected or admired or coveted by people that are into watches in any real way. A Breguet is one of those watches that people look at and they say, "Oh, that's great. That's really nice, man. Great watch." You know, oh, you're the guy that read the book, right? It's like, that's it. It's a dork's watch, and it really should be a crown prince's watch, right? Period. So that's my, rant about Breguet. They understand everything Rolex doesn't, and nothing Rolex does. Period. End. Rolex understands scale, and they understand marketing, and they understand, by extension, going down that line, stories, and they understand so much. But Breguet is far more brilliant in the art and the science of this great hobby. So they ought to be sitting in a much more prominent seat, and they're not. So without any further ado, we're going to play now a piece of our episode from the Zero, where I sat down with one of our members, Mark, and talked about independent manufacturers. And while we didn't talk much about Breguet or at all about Breguet, we did talk about the beauty of the bespoke experience, right? We talked about how incredible it is to actually commission something, which is something that we're not really used to anymore, right? Commission something that isn't just a color change, but rather, a whole experience. So if you like what you're about to see, head on over to the Zero and become a member. You can sign up for a free 1-week trial and take a look at some of the content, but we release videos every week and podcasts and photos and behind the scenes. So it's a really great place to be. We've got an amazing community. So head on over to the Zero and claim your Theo and Harris gift cards as well, because we give out plenty. And hope to see you on over there and enjoy this little bit about independence from our friend Mark. That's it. We're in. Mark, happy Saturday, man. Right. How are you?
I'm great, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Again, it's a pleasure to connect. I know that you've been following the company for a little while, but as I just told you, I've been following you for a while. And for everyone else, I don't think you're in the watch industry at all, right? You're not in the watch industry, or are you?
No, yeah. No. I just.
But your perspective on independence has always fascinated me, and you've purchased and supported a lot of really interesting independents that I've never even heard of a lot of the time, right? You've sent me stuff, and I never even knew about some of these brands and the methods they were using, or the materials they were using, or the designs and the design languages, and it's a big compliment, I think, for me to say, you've taught me a ton about watchmaking. So I think that's amazing. So thank you for taking some time, and I'm looking forward to sharing your perspective with all of our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to be here.
So tell me when you got interested in watches, how you got interested in watches, and let's go back there.
Yeah, I guess probably back around high school or something like that. I remember I got 2 watches. One was like this Disneyland Mickey Mouse watch. I think a former girlfriend bought it for me. And then the same one bought me this Citizen chronograph, which I was just enamored with. I mean, it was, quartz and all these sorts of things, but it was just super cool. And I think that's really what kind of, kicked the fascination off. And from there, it was like I wore that probably for, I don't know, I'm going to say 10, 12, maybe it was 15 years. Who knows? You lose perspective over time of that time frame. But I wore that thing, every single day. And then I want to say it was 2005 when I first started my company. I don't know why I did it. I stopped in at a jewelry store, decided I was going to buy this Hamilton Slimline or something like that. Bought it. It was like the beginning of my business, and I shouldn't have been buying like an $800 watch. I had no idea the difference between retail and maybe what I could have negotiated at the time. Spent $800 on this watch. My wife nearly killed me because, just started the business and everything. And I think she was pregnant at the time. So anyway, that's kind of what that was liftoff.
You had to explain to her, listen, sweetheart, there's never a good time for these things. She's like, what? What are you talking about?
I've proven that over my entire career. There's never a good time for anything, but I do it anyway.
100%. I have a lot of buddies. Obviously, I think that, entrepreneurs often know a lot of entrepreneurs just by the nature of the beast or whatever.
Yeah.
And, a couple of buddies, they're always looking to they're critical of consultants, and consultants can be a pain because a lot of time, the insights aren't necessarily novel. But I do say, hey, man, they're going to tell you some things that are so obvious and Googleable, but until someone tells it to you in respect to your business, you're not going to understand it. And one of those things is there's not a good time. You have to just do it. You got to just do it. And that applies to everything, business and watches and everything. There's never a good time.
No doubt. No doubt.
So tell me, obviously that's the beginning. Let's fast forward, share a little bit about your collection now. And then then we'll go deep into some of the brands and some of your perspectives on the matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So right now, it's kind of a mixture of independent brands. And then, a couple things that I've come to love over time. Actually, you've had a huge influence on me with this, and that's Cartier. This Santos Dumont right here, mid 90s. I probably wear that half the time right now. I just have really developed an affection thanks to your stewardship on the brand.
Yeah, well, I think that's a really interesting watch. When did you buy that watch?
Let's say had to be at least a year ago.
Mm-hmm. So those watches, again, you're right. In the mid 90s, those watches were, so oddly close to the originals. It's kind of crazy, right? I mean, and that was before reissues were really a thing, right? Reissues as a class of watch didn't really become popular again until 2011, 12, 13. That's when things really started picking up in that world, heavily. And yet Cartier at the time, kind of ahead of their time, was saying, wait, let's go back in the catalog and, remanufacture basically our first watch. That was the original.
Yeah.
So a beautiful piece.
So I'll just start with my not oldest piece, but one of the ones that really, when I started collecting independents, I met Edward Malon and I from Moser started just chatting back and forth on Instagram and things like that a lot. And I had picked up a pre-owned piece from him. And I just love that connection, that interaction with somebody who owned the brand, was passionate about the brand and came to like his story and everything. But the thing that I saw, because I got a Streamliner then and a Heritage, the thing that I didn't do was I wasn't able to actually connect with the watchmaker themselves. And it wasn't until I met Stefan and Yves Kadoki that, and this was like, maybe like just around COVID, maybe right after COVID sort of thing. But met them. And I'll always remember this. We were in a chat kind of like this. And Stefan looked at me after we talked about what we wanted to do and some initial ideas and things. And he was like, I will do my very best for you. And like, he just looked at me, like with that kind of some like German intensity, like, this could go well, or maybe it's going to go the wrong way, but it went well. And got the project started from there. And it was like that connection that really cemented maybe my love for independence for the first time, even though I was already kind of dabbling.
Yeah, I think that the common and natural trepidation for folks getting into, like, even when they think about independence, to begin with, is they don't see the incredible experience in positive because they've never experienced it. So how could you, right? You can't really foresee it. And then the negative, or people say, well, no one else knows what it is, number one. So there's really not a lot of street cred that people think they're getting. I would argue that you really don't get street cred for watches anyway. No one really cares. You could wear a $30,000 Patek and, no one knows anyway. So it's kind of the independence of the same. And then the other is, residual value. People think about, well, I'm afraid, what if I have to sell it, whatever. And I always liken it a lot to clothing. We never think about that, but people that, will buy a really beautiful, sport jacket or whatever, we're not thinking about, right, residual value. We're thinking about artisanship, right? We're thinking about that with shoes as well, right? And I know a lot of guys that will have really incredible garments made, but they were always a little bit, nervous to get to do it in watches. And then everyone that does go do it, they're like, oh my God, the experience is unlike any other, right? The experience is unlike any other.
Yeah, the experience, I'd also say the satisfaction, right? I've had a lot of big brands over time, and there's always just that little bit for me anyway. I can only speak for my own experience, but that, thing in the background that's just like, it's just kind of like everybody else's, right? I've never been a conformist, probably the opposite. And so it's just not in me to just, kind of go the same path that everybody else is. But for some people, they love that. I love heritage as much as somebody else, but if it looks like everything else that's out there, it kind of nags at me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I think that a lot of, even on the shopping experience, there's nothing worse than taking any amount of money, but particularly an amount of money that matters to you, right? And that's different for everybody. But and kind of feeling a little bit like cattle, which I think is a way that a lot of watch shopping and shopping in general can feel. It's just that watch shopping is an expensive form of shopping. And I think that, and I don't think this is controversial, but, it's really hard earned money. Money is hard earned, whatever. And it's shitty. It's shitty to take that money. Like it's what turned a lot of people off about, even getting on lists with Rolex in the last couple of months. And it's not Rolex's fault by any means. But when ADs are a little bit pompous and whatever, it turns you off. I did happen with me with AP. I was considering getting an Audemars. I had a, less than stellar experience. And I was like, oh, wait, I think I'm the idiot if I buy this. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think I'm a schmuck, I'm out, it's not a reflection on the watch, but you will kind of want to be you certainly want to feel more special. If you're handing over someone an amount of money that matters to you, you do want to feel like you're on their radar as opposed to one of a billion. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned, AP and Rolex and things like that, because I've had really good experiences with both brands and boutiques and things like that. Never had that negative experience with a Rolex boutique. I had a great experience down in Georgia with an AP boutique. In fact, they called me several times offering me pieces, and each time I just couldn't pull the trigger because, again, there was just nothing unique to me about that experience. And when I had the thought that, hey, I'm gonna get it, pick up an AP or something like that. When time came that I was offered one, I turned it down. So.
Yeah. So tell me about, we're starting off with the Kadoki. Tell me about that watch. If you were to explain it, obviously everyone that's listening to this has prerequisite knowledge about watches, but, if you were to explain what makes it so interesting or impressive or lovable, give it to me.
Yeah, I think with the Kadoki, I think it really comes down to the movement. Stefan's really particular about what he's willing to do and not do. So when it comes to the dial, he has his mind made up as to what he's, willing to do with the dial. And from time to time, he'll depart a little bit. But you take into consideration the movement side of things. And then, he's really about engraving and unique finishes. So one of the things that I had seen kind of leading up to this is I really got into like a trivia and things. And I had seen hand hammering at kind of like a larger style hand hammering in the AK06, I think it was. And so we talked about a hand hammering technique. Let me just kind of get up a little closer here if you can see that. And he wanted to do more of a micro hand hammering. So I don't know how many thousands of times a little pin came in contact with that plate right there. But he wanted to do it a micro hand hammering, so it'll be a finer finish. He wanted to do the plate. I think he does all the 3/4 plates in German silver, so that over time it would kind of take on that golden hue patina that's so famous for German silver. And then so that's where we started at. As you can see, the engraving of the balance cock and everything there, features his traditional what do you call that? I can't think of the term for infinity symbol, right? So there is that element to it. And then what we decided to do was take that 3/4 plate, reduce it by 50% so that he could relief engrave this idea of a rhododendron flower. So you can see that right there in the corner. And what that was all about was we were looking for like I don't know, I love relationships. So we were looking for something that over time would symbolize that connection between where we are, in the Blue Ridge Mountains and where he is near, Dresden, Germany. And the common flower, the common plant was rhododendron. I don't know how we got to that exactly, but when we did, it was like, that's it.
That's so cool. It's bizarre.
Right.
It's so neat, Yeah. Again, I mean, stuff like that, the more you get into any hobby, watches being a great example, the more you beg of it, right? I mean, the more the more the less you're impressed by, right? And at the end of the day, it's little things like that, right? I mean, the idea that someone could, and again, I love Tiffany stamped Rolex and Patek. I think that's super, super cool. It's neat, but it is still, it does not represent any level of actual intelligence or thought. I mean, it's just a representation of two major brands that people want to be associated with, right? Whereas when you've got a symbol that has virtually no meaning to anyone else, I mean, the rhododendron flower has no meaning to anyone else, right? I mean, outside of this relationship, but it is the ultimate, right? I'm kind of a patron of the arts. This is kind of my thing. I have a buddy that always does a one different button, right? It's this thing. And he likes little things, but it does make it very personal. It makes it very personal and special as an experience. And that's a great example, that flower.
Yeah. And it really does connect you with those people so that kind of, down the road, like we're planning a trip overseas next year for about a month. And part of the experience is going to be just going and meeting all of these friends who, I've made over time as just part of that trip. So it just, it's just a different layer of collecting that I've really come to enjoy.